Everyone pities the anxious, no one notices the avoidant. Let's talk about something that goes unnoticed far too often in relationships. When we think of emotional struggle in love, our minds tend to go to the person who's visibly hurting, the one who texts too much, who overthinks every word, who feels deeply and expresses it often. We pity the anxious. We see their panic. We see their tears. We feel their longing. And we empathize. But there's someone else in the room. They're just quieter about it. It's the avoidant. The person who seems calm, detached, even indifferent on the surface. But behind that calm, there's fear. Deep, aching fear. You see, the avoidant doesn't know how to reach out. They've been wired, often since childhood, to associate closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with danger. So instead of running toward love, they retreat from it. They disappear, they distract, they stay in their heads. And while the anxious feels their suffering in loud, desperate waves, the avoidant experiences it in silence. Their pain isn't dramatic, it's slow, it's lonely. It's the ache of missing someone deeply and not knowing how to say, I miss you. What's tragic is that we rarely recognize their suffering. We call them cold, distant, selfish, but what they really are is scared. This isn't about excusing behavior, it's about understanding. If you're avoidant, know this: pulling away won't protect you from pain. It will guarantee it. You don't have to heal all at once, but start noticing when your fear is driving the car. Start choosing to stay even when it feels uncomfortable. And if you're loving someone avoidant, remember, it's not that they don't feel, it's that they don't feel safe. Let's stop seeing one kind of pain as more real than another. Everyone struggles. The wounds just wear different clothes. We often assume that emotional pain looks like tears, overreactions, and constant communication, the visible signs we associate with the anxious. But emotional pain doesn't always make noise. In fact, some of the deepest emotional suffering wears a mask of control, calm, and even aloofness. The avoidant person, the one who seems fine, detached, or emotionally unavailable, is often battling an internal world filled with fear, self-protection, and loneliness. Their pain is invisible because it doesn't beg for attention. It hides. And that's why we miss it. We live in a culture that tends to notice the loudest form of distress. The person who's texting late at night, seeking reassurance, asking questions, over-analyzing interactions. These are the behaviors we associate with someone who's struggling. We label them as anxious, needy, or insecure. And although those terms carry stigma, there's still a measure of sympathy afforded to them. We see their wounds. We recognize the vulnerability, and we feel compelled to soothe it. But when someone withdraws, we usually don't interpret it as a cry for help. We see disinterest. We think they don't care. We assume they're emotionally checked out or playing games. And in doing so, we fail to see the truth, that they might be overwhelmed, afraid of closeness, or stuck in patterns they developed long ago to protect themselves from getting hurt. The avoidant person doesn't usually show panic on the outside, but that doesn't mean they're calm. Instead, their mind is working overtime to stay in control. They might be hyper-aware of how much space they need to feel safe. They might feel suffocated by too much closeness, even if deep down they crave connection. Their silence, their distance, and their tendency to retreat are not signs that they feel nothing. They're signs that feeling too much has historically been unsafe. What makes their struggle harder to recognize is that avoidant behaviors can come off as confidence or independence. In reality, it's often self-protection in disguise. They're not always avoiding love. They're avoiding the vulnerability that love demands. They're protecting themselves from expectations, intimacy, and the possibility of abandonment. But instead of dealing with the fear directly, they retreat into their own shell, sometimes cutting people off emotionally before those people ever get a chance to really connect. This kind of pain doesn't invite others in, it repels. And because of that, the avoidant person often suffers alone, not because they want to, but because they don't know how to suffer with someone. They've been wired to believe that closeness equals danger. So while the anxious clings to soothe their fear, the avoidant detaches to manage theirs. But the pain is there, just buried beneath layers of silence, distraction, and distance. So when we assume the anxious suffer more simply because they express more, we're only seeing half the story. The avoidance pain is just as real. It's just much harder to spot. And that invisibility makes it all the more isolating. Avoidant behavior is often misunderstood as a sign of indifference or emotional coldness, but at its core, it is deeply rooted in fear, specifically the fear of vulnerability. People with avoidant tendencies didn't wake up one day and decide to detach from others. Their behavior is usually the result of experiences, often early in life, where emotional closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or overwhelming. Over time, they learned that the best way to avoid being hurt was to avoid getting too close. And so they built walls, not because they don't want love, but because love has come to represent risk. When someone fears vulnerability, their emotional system is wired to detect intimacy as a threat. That means even genuine acts of love, affection, or connection can trigger discomfort. The closer someone gets, the more exposed the avoidant feels. Instead of leaning in, they pull away. This isn't because they don't feel anything. On the contrary, they often feel deeply. But feeling deeply without knowing how to safely express or manage those feelings becomes overwhelming. So they shut down, suppress, or rationalize their way out of connection. It's not about not caring, it's about not feeling safe to show how much they care. This fear-based reaction isn't always obvious to outsiders. It can look like someone who is cool under pressure, emotionally self-sufficient, or just not that into relationships. But beneath that exterior is often a nervous system on high alert, scanning for any sign that intimacy might lead to loss, criticism, rejection, or enmeshment. Avoidants often develop a hyper-independence, not because they don't want help or support, but because relying on others has historically led to disappointment or emotional chaos. So they rely on themselves. It feels safer, even if it's lonelier. These protective behaviors can be frustrating for partners who crave emotional closeness. They may interpret distance as rejection, which only deepens the cycle. The more the anxious partner reaches out, the more the avoidant partner retreats. This doesn't happen out of malice. It's a fear response built over time. The avoidant isn't trying to hurt anyone. They're trying not to be hurt. The tragedy is that this fear of vulnerability not only pushes others away, but also keeps the avoidant stuck in a loop of isolation. They long for love, but fear the cost of it. They crave connection, but equate it with loss of control. As a result, they often sabotage the very intimacy they desire most. Understanding that avoidant behavior stems from fear can change the way we approach it, not with judgment, but with compassion. It doesn't excuse poor communication or emotional unavailability, but it helps explain it. And with awareness comes the opportunity for change. Avoidants can learn to tolerate vulnerability in small steps, to recognize when fear is driving their choices, and to challenge the belief that closeness always leads to pain. But first, that fear has to be seen, not just by others, but by themselves. When we look at the anxious and avoidant attachment styles, it's easy to assume one person is the emotional one and the other simply doesn't care. But that's a shallow view of what's really happening beneath the surface. The truth is, both the anxious and the avoidant are hurting. They're just expressing that pain in opposite ways. One cries out, the other goes quiet. one chases, the other runs, but both are acting from a place of fear, insecurity, and a desperate need to protect themselves. The anxious individual experiences emotional intensity outwardly. Their need for connection shows up as constant seeking reassurance, seeking contact, seeking signs that they're wanted and safe. This behavior is often labeled as too much, but it comes from a deep fear of abandonment. For the anxious, love feels fragile and closeness feels like something that could disappear at any moment. So they cling, they ask questions, they analyze tone, timing, and silence. They try to close the emotional gap as quickly as possible because distance to them feels danger. On the other hand, the avoidant also fears closeness, but for different reasons. Where the anxious sees distance as danger, the avoidant sees closeness as a threat. They may have grown up in environments where expressing needs led to criticism, shame, or being overwhelmed. Their nervous system equates intimacy with losing control or being engulfed. So when things get emotionally intense, they pull away, not because they don't care, but because they feel unsafe in the intensity. For them, independence and emotional distance feel like safety. This dynamic leads to a painful and ironic cycle. The anxious person reaches out in fear, looking for closeness, and the avoidant person withdraws in fear, trying to create space. The more one reaches, the more the other pulls away. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. They're just doing what they've always done to protect themselves from emotional pain. And in doing so, they end up reinforcing each other's deepest fears. What gets missed in this cycle is the fact that both people are suffering. The anxious person is overwhelmed by uncertainty and hyper-alert to emotional cues, often misreading situations and feeling rejected even when they're not. Meanwhile, the avoidant person is emotionally flooded, but instead of expressing it, they suppress it. Their pain isn't as obvious, but it's just as real. It shows up in moments of numbness, emotional shutdown, or a haunting feeling of being alone, even in a relationship. So while it's easier to see the anxious person's distress because it's outward and vocal, the avoidant is suffering too, inwardly, quietly, and often without language for what they're feeling. Both are reacting from trauma, from attachment wounds, from learned behaviors that once protected them but now sabotage their adult relationships. And both are worthy of compassion, not comparison. Pain doesn't have to be loud to be valid. Some people cry on the outside, others bleed on the inside. Avoidant individuals often face a unique kind of misunderstanding in relationships. Because their way of coping with emotional discomfort is to retreat. People around them may label them as cold, detached, or even selfish. But labeling someone avoidant without understanding the root of their behavior misses the point, and it misses the person. The truth is, avoidants need compassion just as much as anyone else, perhaps even more, because they're often the least likely to ask for it. People with avoidant tendencies didn't choose to be this way. Their emotional patterns are often the result of experiences where closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or overwhelming. Many grew up in environments where their emotional needs weren't met consistently, or worse, where expressing those needs led to rejection, shaming, or punishment. Over time, they learned to suppress their needs and become self-reliant because depending on others felt too risky. That self-reliance over time becomes a defense mechanism, a wall they build between themselves and potential pain. When an avoidant person pulls away, it's not always because they've stopped caring. More often, it's because they've reached a point where their system feels flooded, overwhelmed, or emotionally exposed. They shut down to regain control. But what looks like distance is often fear in disguise. Fear of losing themselves. Fear of being criticized. Fear of not being enough or being too much. And most of all, fear of being hurt in the exact way they were before. Responding to that behavior with judgment or frustration only deepens the cycle. It confirms what the avoidant person already believes, that emotional closeness leads to pressure, conflict, or shame. That belief keeps them locked in a loop where they retreat to protect themselves, even when what they truly want is to feel safe enough to connect. Compassion doesn't mean lowering boundaries or tolerating emotionally harmful behavior. It means recognizing the humanity behind the behavior. It means understanding that someone's avoidance isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their fear. When you respond with curiosity rather than criticism, you create an opportunity for safety. You invite the avoidant person into a different kind of experience, one where intimacy doesn't automatically mean danger. This shift in approach can be transformative. Instead of trying to force closeness, you give space while also staying emotionally available. Instead of interpreting distance as rejection, you ask questions with empathy, not accusation. You begin to understand their rhythm. And in doing so, you help them learn a new pattern, that closeness can feel safe even when it's unfamiliar. Avoidant individuals are not broken. They are people who learn to survive by shutting down their emotional needs. With understanding, patience, and the right support, they can learn to reconnect with those parts of them. But first, they need to be seen not as distant or unloving, but as someone who has simply never known what it feels like to be fully safe in closeness. Compassion is the bridge that gets them there. Healing begins with awareness. This is true for everyone, but especially for those navigating anxious or avoidant attachment patterns. So much of our behavior in relationships is automatic, deeply conditioned by early experiences and past wounds. We act, react, pull close, or push away without always knowing why. The avoidant in particular often operates from an instinct, an ingrained response to vulnerability that says, "This isn't safe, protect yourself." Until that instinct is brought into awareness, it continues to quietly control decisions, sabotaging connection without the person even realizing it. Awareness doesn't mean judgment. It doesn't mean calling yourself broken or labeling every reaction as toxic. It simply means becoming conscious of the patterns that drive you. Why do you shut down when someone gets too close? Why does silence feel safer than speaking up? Why does emotional intensity feel like a threat, even when it's coming from someone who loves you? These are the questions that open the door to change. They create space between reaction and choice. A space where something new can happen. For someone with avoidant tendencies, awareness means noticing the urge to retreat and gently asking, what am I protecting myself from? Often, it's not the current partner or situation that's dangerous, it's a ghost from the past. Maybe it's a parent who criticized vulnerability. Maybe it's an old relationship where needs were used against you. The avoidant reflex is rooted in history, not always in the present. But until you become aware of that, your nervous system will keep acting as if the danger is still real. Once you can see the pattern, you can start to make different choices. You don't have to leap into full emotional exposure overnight. Small steps matter. It might mean staying in a conversation a little longer before shutting down. It might mean naming a feeling instead of bottling it. It might mean choosing to be honest about your discomfort rather than these may sound like small things, but for someone who's spent a lifetime hiding behind independence, they're huge. If you're someone who loves an avoidant partner, your awareness matters too. You can learn to recognize the difference between disinterest and fear. You can respond to withdrawal, not with panic or blame, but with grounded empathy. That doesn't mean tolerating neglect or excusing harmful behavior. It means understanding the difference between a partner who won't and a partner who doesn't yet know how. That difference matters. It's the gap where healing can take place if both people are willing. Ultimately, awareness is where all transformation begins. Without it, we stay stuck in cycles, repeating the same pain in new relationships and wondering why love always feels out of reach. But with it, we create the power to choose how we show up, how we respond, and how we love. For the avoidant, that choice can feel terrifying, but it's also the path back to connection, not just with others, but with themselves. As we've explored today, the experience of emotional pain and fear in relationships isn't one size fits all. While the anxious may wear their hearts on their sleeves, the avoidant carries a quieter, often unseen burden. Both are deserving of understanding and compassion. Recognizing that avoidant behavior stems from fear, not indifference, opens the door to empathy and healing. It reminds us that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools they have, and that connection is possible when we choose awareness over judgment. If you identify with being avoidant, remember this: your feelings are valid, your fear is real, and you are not alone. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but every small step toward awareness and vulnerability is a step toward deeper connection, not just with others, but with yourself. And if you love someone who struggles with avoidance, your patience and compassion can be the safe space they need to start breaking down their walls. Together, with understanding and kindness, you can create a relationship that feels secure and nourishing for both of you. Thank you so much for listening and being open to this conversation. It takes courage to face these realities, and your willingness to understand is the first step toward change. I wish you all the best on your journey to deeper connection and greater emotional freedom. Take care, and remember, you're never truly alone in this.